Welcome everybody to the True Crime Museum. We're privileged and delighted to say hello to Ricky Thomas, the author who's provided us with the correspondence for the Love Richard exhibition, all about Richard Ramirez. Ricky, welcome. You've seen the exhibition that we've put together, Love Richard, which is constituted of your correspondence with Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Let me first ask you, what initiated your correspondence with the Night Stalker?
I've always been fascinated about him. He was killing when I first got interested in serial killers. I followed the case very closely and read as much as I could about him, and the next progression, the obvious step to take, was to ask him himself, or not actually ask him because you don't talk about the crimes, but just to see if I could get anything about his psychology, about him, from writing personally. I suppose it was a moment of madness making that first letter, and I didn't think he would respond, but he did, and it surprised me.
When you wrote to him, were there other potential candidates that you were thinking of writing to? Why was it just Richard Ramirez?
He's my study as an author. He's my lifelong study. I'm sure I'll still be studying more about him if I get to 80 or thereabouts.
He certainly does hold a fascination for many people interested in crime, and we find that at the True Crime Museum we have lots of visitors, and I will choose my phrases very, very carefully on this one, especially female visitors who have a strong, I wouldn't use the word affection, but I'd use the word interest and attraction to him, perhaps.
He's a good-looking guy, or he was a good-looking guy. Not inside, obviously, but yes, I think that's where the fascination. Ted Bundy's the other one that women in particular like, because I don't see it, but apparently he was good-looking too. I think that goes a long way. I think that Richard probably, if he'd chosen a different path, he could probably have been a model, and a very successful one.
Evil has always existed. The perfect world most people seek shall never come to pass.
He was a charismatic person in court, and attracted what can only be described as groupies.
Yes, he had groupies, and I find the whole situation with them bizarre, because I mean, even one of the jurors fell in love with him. It's like you're hearing about these crimes where he's mutilated people and he's killed them in cold blood, and then they're fantasizing about him, and I find that so interesting, intriguing. Why would you do that? But
permit the impertinent question, did you find him attractive when you wrote to him? Yeah,
but not in a way when I would ever. I mean, he's a good-looking guy, and I can appreciate that he was good-looking, but for me personally, no, I didn't ever fancy him, is probably the word.
Yeah.
No.
What would you say to people who would say that he should have been extinguished from this earth and not allowed any kind of privileges, even that of life, should just have been executed, perhaps?
I think that people need to study serial killers, people like myself, because they're going to keep happening. And if somebody doesn't take it, if everybody says, right, we can't talk about that, we can't do anything with that, then you're not going to learn out why these people are doing these crimes. Ted Bundy, I thought it was awful that he did actually go to death row, because he was actually assisting the CIA with an insight. He helped with the Green River killer. But once they're dead, you can't study them any longer. And one of the things they're finding is that there is actually a fault on the brain, frontal lobe. And, we need to research this. You need to, because it's going to keep happening.
And Ramirez himself had a traumatic, troubled childhood in which his cousin Mike showed him photographs of mutilated women in Vietnam who he had killed, raped and so on, and taken photographs, and then came home to show the 12-year-old Ramirez those photographs. He also shot his wife, Mike shot his wife in front of Ramirez. I believe he was about 12 years old at the time, which must have been traumatising. Not to say that that is in any way an excuse for the horrific crimes that Ramirez himself went on to commit, but in some way it could be contributory, would you say?
I think it absolutely was. I think that the cousin Mike was almost as guilty. 12 is a very formative age. It was around about the age when Richard was becoming sexually aware, and he recalled the blood spatter from Mike's wife hitting him. He was covered in it. He'd just seen her shot in the face, point blank, and then Mike boasting about it. And of course that's going to affect a 12-year-old, not necessarily in the way it did affect him, but obviously that's going to be a really traumatic thing. And the fact is he didn't tell anybody it had happened. He didn't tell anyone he'd been there because he was protecting his cousin. And so he never received any form of counselling or talking it through. It just became this thing in his mind, seeing the pictures of rape victims in Vietnam. And it escalated that many serial killers will need the death part to achieve sexual gratification, and that just became his thing. He enjoyed the torture and he enjoyed the mutilation because it helped him achieve what he needed to in that department.
So the content of the first letter, what did you make of that? He was quite...
I thought it was quite cold. It was clearly a standard response that he would give to all the thousands of people who wrote to him. It was unremarkable, but it was an invite to write back.
Right.
And that was a goal as far as I was concerned. Over the course of the letters, we did get more involved in that. Obviously, he was asking me more questions, many of which I didn't want to answer and many of which I didn't. I didn't send him anything that he was requesting because I wasn't prepared to go down that route.
Right.
I wasn't his friend, I was researching him, and ultimately I stopped because he made me uncomfortable.
It's interesting that you use that comment, you weren't his friend, because he writes on some of the correspondence, your friend
I know,
Richard.
and he was saying, love Richard, and I was like, well, you know, I found that quite bizarre.
What was he getting from the correspondence?
I have no idea. Maybe someone who wasn't throwing themselves at him? I don't know, but I was just surprised every time another letter turned up. I was just surprised, and especially the one where he'd made me a card. A handmade card, and that was sweet. Somebody who's killed so savagely, then hand making a card. it's just odd.
What insight do you think you got into his mind through the letters that you received?
Definitely a psychopath. Definitely a psychopath. He was twisted. He had fetishes, and that was fueled by the fact he was locked in a cage, 23, 24 hours a day. Had nothing else to think about but himself and these people who write to him, and I think it was probably a good life for him, really. He wasn't able to go out or anything, but he was enjoying his fantasies non-stop.
Right.
All the time he was locked away.
His attention needs were being met through the correspondence. And
he must have felt so powerful through that, and there he was. I mean, serial killers are glorified, and he was one of the top dogs.
Yet you've also commented, when I spoke to you earlier, you said that you felt you were writing to a human being rather than a monster.
Yeah, because that was how it became, because the more he opened up, he stopped so much asking me for things that I wasn't prepared to give. Naked photos, footprints. He wanted footprints of me and my son. And no way.
Do you think you'd write to anybody else on death row or any other serial killers, perhaps in this country?
In this country, I wrote one letter to Stephen Wright, who's the Ipswich killer, who didn't even get it. It was sent back, and apparently no letters can get through to him.
Why is that? Is the system different in this country for correspondence with serial killers than it would be in America, do you you think it's more lax in America, more relaxed?
I don't know, because I've not really done it much, but...
But you've never had any problems getting any letters through or from Ramirez?
No problem at all.
Including some, I wouldn't say graphic art, but fairly graphic art and some fairly suggestive poetry as well.
Yeah.
Or some fairly pornographic
I must
poetry,
admit,
let's call it what it is.
I didn't read that when it first came. I got through the first paragraph, and it wasn't until I brought the letters to you that I read it and thought, oh, actually, I'm glad I didn't read it before.
Just to clarify with our viewers, it was a extremely erotic piece of, I'm not sure if we call it literature. Did he write it, I think, and then asked his correspondence and asked you to complete it, presumably to fuel his fantasies?
I don't know, but I didn't anyway.
And that really was what sort of ended the correspondence, that, and...
I felt it was going too far.
Right.
He was asking for too many questions about my boy, who was 6 at the time, and I didn't like it. It was too uncomfortable for me. Thanks
ever so much for that, Ricky. That was absolutely fascinating insight into the mind of a serial killer there. Come down to the True Crime Museum, and for the rest of February we have on display the letters that Richard Ramirez and Ricky exchanged. Once again, many, many thanks to you. Ricky's books are available here in the shop at the True Crime Museum. They are fascinating reads, all about crime, and we hope to see you soon.